Yeah. That's it, folks. Licorice Alive with Sonny Rollins. Pent-up House coming to you off my clarinet, courtesy of iRealB, my little app player. Pent-up House, it's not Pent-up House of Representatives, but that's what is going on right now in the body politic. But Pent-up House was recorded with Clifford Brown and Max Roach in 1956. That's my birth year, on the album Sonny Rollins +4. Sonny Rollins is still alive. He's still doing it. He's still with us, so that's good news. But sadly, one of his accompanying players on the trumpet, Clifford Brown, isn't. He died just a few months after this recording with the piano player also, Richie Powell. They died in a car crash 3 months later. So if you get a chance, check it out. Pent-up House, Sonny Rollins. Did my best to make it real on the clarinet. Welcome, folks. Where are we? Episode 21 of Rebel Without Applause, coming to you, as always, from the Wood of the Holly. I can see the sign out my window, and thankfully it looks like the smoke has cleared in my neighborhood, and the fires aren't over, but the breathing is somewhat easier, at least where I live. So another installment, I'll be trying to break it down politics-wise and history-wise and hopefully a little laughter-wise. What's up? Sessions. Jeffrey, the Beauregard, is out. And the new flunky is in. And now, what can I say? The billionaire brat boy is hunkering down. He's in his bunker. The meltdown is on, it feels like. And the engines of war are in motion. The artillery is aligned. The mortars are loaded. The cannon shells are primed. And inside that bunker, I mean the White House, around that bunker, rather, the concertina wire and the claymore mines are being laid. The snipers are cleaning their rifles and focusing their scopes. Yep, I feel it. The climactic showdown is coming. And I think the stakes are clear. Will the truth shine or darkness reign? Will democracy survive or the fat boy fascist prevail? Well, we'll see. The ironic thing about all of this, though, is that by any standard, the outgoing Attorney General, that being Jeffrey Beauregard Sessions, well, he is an unreconstructed, pro-segregation, anti-immigration, old-school Confederate. But now, because he recused himself, this eminently forgettable Jim Crow-loving doofus, he gets to leave his office of Attorney General a kind of, well, maybe sort of hero. You know, who well? Oh, well. History does work in strange ways. And what does that leave us with? This new guy, what's his name? I can't even remember. Oh, yeah, Whitaker. Now, you can be sure that this big, bald-headed dude has been lying in the weeds waiting for his moment. You can bet your last dollar on one thing. His powder is dry, his musket is loaded, and he is ready, willing, and able to do the PVP's dirty business. PVP, for those of you that are new to this little podcast experiment, the PVP stands for Putin's Vice President. And anyway, this new guy is ready, willing, and able to put the Mueller investigation right where his crime boss wants it, 6 feet fucking under. So as my favorite lesbian Rachel says, let's keep an eye on that story. And speaking of muskets, I noticed where the PVP recently decided to bail on the Belleau Wood War Memorial on Sunday. And I don't want to get too deep into military history, but suffice to say, the Belleau Wood battlefield is hallowed ground to any U.S. Marine. I mean, up until June of 1917, the Marines, the U.S. Marine Corps, were pretty much a backwater piece of the U.S. war machines. Their, I guess, prior engagements were on little foreign escarpments in Central America. They battled Barbary pirates. Mostly they were consigned to firing their muskets from the rigging of U.S. sailing ships. But on that patch of wooded hunting preserve, the U.S. Marine Corps, in that June of 1917, got their first taste of modern mechanized warfare. And that's where the current reputation of the Marine Corps really began. It was inside this dense thicket of forest that the U.S. Marines blunted the German spear some 40 miles outside of the French capital. It was a critical battle not only for the Marines, but it was actually part of a series of engagements in that summer that ultimately led to the armistice we just celebrated. So, over the weekend, to commemorate the 100-year anniversary of that armistice, there was a memorial service planned at Belleau Wood. But sadly, as you might know already, there was some rain and some fog over Paris, and the traffic was kind of bad, and the brat boy billionaire, he was in a shitty mood because of the election. Hey, I get it. I can understand. I'm an Uber driver. Traffic can be a hassle. So the PVP decided to lower his carbon footprint and chill inside his presidential suite overlooking the Champs-Élysées. Now, in defense of the brat boy billionaire, let's face it, that Sunday there were some good NFL games on TV, and I'm sure he thought it was best for the country that he make sure no black players disrespected the national anthem. So what did he do? He bailed on the memorial festivities. Instead, he sent the chief of staff, flunky, I forget his name, and let him do the saluting and wreath-laying with Macron and Angela Merkel, which I guess it's okay. I mean, it's the only thing I can say, it's just too bad that the thousands of U.S. Marines that are buried there and the 120,000 other U.S. souls that perished over in Europe didn't have those same options. But what the hell? I guess in those days there was no TV and no football, and they had nothing better to do than die for their country, so okay, whatever. So, we just passed the 100-year anniversary of the end of World War I, which by any measure was arguably the biggest historical catastrophe of all time, or at least since, that asteroid smashed into Earth and wiped out all the dinosaurs. So World War I pretty much set the stage for the world we now live in. So if you want to understand the Middle East, go back to World War I. If you're confused about why there's so many little countries in the Balkans, if you're not sure what triggered the Russian Revolution and what Lenin and Trotsky and all those meanie Bolsheviks were all so pissed off about, if you're curious to know out of what muck and mire did that goofy corporal with the Chaplin mustache climb out of, you got to go back to the Ersten Welt Krieg. Yep, that's German for World War I. If you're, let's say, curious about the League of Nations, about colonialism, about third world nationalism, and about how the Spanish flu killed an extra 20 million people after the Ersten Welt Krieg, maybe it's time you open up a history book. And my first recommendation, history book-wise, would be Barbara Tuchman's Guns of August. Really one of the greatest, in my view, historical works ever written. She was a splendid author, right up there with Robert Caro and David Halberstam. I'm going to talk about him maybe a little more later. But The Guns of August, it really reads like a novel. It is a massively important work to understand that age and, by extension, ours. So if you're curious about how that war, to end all wars, as they called it then, affected, for example, Africa, I've got another novel I'd like to recommend, and that's called An Ice Cream War by William Boyd, which, frankly, I think would make a great movie, not a Netflix presentation. I mean a real frigging 35-millimeter balls-to-the-wall fucking movie. And let's say, what else to clarify? If you're, let's say, confused about all the current mishigas in the Middle East, it might be time to revisit David Lean's World War I epic, Lawrence of Arabia. Everything you need to know is right in there. Otherwise, there are some other great movies, I think, to catch up to. Firstly, for my money, there's Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory. I think that's his best film. Then there's the silent classic King Vidor's The Big Parade, which has one of the most spectacular editing and cinema sequences about battle I've ever seen. It actually, I think they filmed it in Griffith Park, but it starts with these soldiers marching abreast in the thicket, and they're just picked off one by one until finally, at the end of this long parade, they're in the midst of the most hellish conflagration anybody could imagine. So if you get a chance, see it on the big screen. King Vidor's silent classic, The Big Parade. Also, there's William Wellman's Wings, which is about the Flyers. That was the movie, by the way, that introduced Gary Cooper and won the first Oscar for Best Picture. And then I can't leave out Louis Milestone's All Quiet on the Western Front. And then, coming from France, there was Jean Renoir's masterful The Grand Illusion with Jean Gabin and Erich von Stroheim. That's the same Erich von Stroheim who we saw on Sunset Boulevard. And lastly, if you got some time, check out Warner Brothers' Sergeant York. That stars Gary Cooper. He plays an alcoholic turned God-loving pacifist turned kraut-killing machine. And for their efforts, Cooper got an Oscar for Best Actor, and York got a Medal of Honor. And frankly, if I ever got the choice, I'd take the Oscar over the Medal of Honor any day. Okay, what else? Last week, I saw something I never see, an opera. That's right, I scored last-minute tickets to Philip Glass's Satyagraha. It's his, how can I describe it? It's his musical meditation on Gandhi's tenure in South Africa at the onset, at the very beginning of the 20th century and slightly before. Now, I'm going to, be a truth teller here. I am not an opera guy. I think my favorite night at the opera was, frankly, the Marx Brothers film. I've seen opera-wise, I don't know, maybe less than a handful in my lifetime. I find them frustrating. I never understand them. They're always in different languages. So as I, talk about this, my thoughts should be taken with a grain of salt, some curry, and a blob of chutney, all smeared on a slice of naan. Okay, the opera, with that weird Hindu name. What is it? Oh, yes, Satyagraha. In style, the opera, well, it reminded me of Bertolt Brecht plays that I did in college, what they call, I don't know, they called it agitprop theater. It was very heavy on multimedia with projections and slideshows and newspaper headlines flying all over the place. The whole presentation had a sort of, distancing effect on me, and what they call in German, the theater people in German would call the Verfremdungseffekt, which had a distancing effect. It sort of detached us from the personal dimension and made us look at the political dimension of the play, and in this case, the opera. Now, the libretto was taken from the ancient Hindu text, the Bhagavad Gita, and the music, which was composed by this avant-garde dude, Philip Glass. The same Philip Glass is going to be getting a Kennedy Center Achievement Award in the next few months. He did the music, and now to the untrained ear, and that's pretty much what I have when it comes to this kind of music. The singing, the music, it felt very chant-like and repetitive. It all had sort of a religious feel as we watched these very talented singer-actor playing Gandhi, warble his way from young Indian lawyer to a deity for the ages. The events depicted in the opera were basically divided into 3 acts, all of which were presided over by 3 figures, each act by a different figure. So the first act was presided over. He was sort of up there and above at the top of the stage. It was presided over by a Russian writer dude. The second act, an Indian poet dude who I know nothing about. And lastly, an American preacher dude. Each of these 3 dudes oversee the operatic proceedings. And now the first act, like I said, is presided over by this Russian writer dude, and his name was Leo Tolstoy. Yes, You guessed it, that is the same Russian dude who wrote those huge novels you've never read, Anna Karenina and War and Peace. And by the way, if you ever get the chance, now we're going back to another movie reference, see the Soviet-era movie version of War and Peace. Oh, my God. It really is one of the greatest cinematic achievements of all time. It's like 7 hours long. It makes Lawrence of Arabia look like a Sundance short. If you can find it, if you can see it, if you can rent it, please go see it. I saw it when I was in college, when they used to have revival houses back in the day. Anyway, this Russian dude, Tolstoy, he was, excuse me, Tolstoy was massively influenced by the 19th century Quaker abolitionists from America, folks like William Lloyd Garrison and this dude who hung out by a pond in Massachusetts named, Henry David Thoreau. Anyway, these dudes were trying to figure out, they were struggling with how to resist slavery and America's first war of colonial expansion against Mexico in 1846. Somehow, some way, the writings by these American abolition dudes find their way onto Tolstoy's cluttered desk all the way over in Russia. Now, I personally don't know if they were FedExed or Tolstoy had an Amazon Prime account or what, but somehow, some way, Leo gets his hands on these writings by these American abolition dudes, and Leo's wheels start turning. And let me tell you, when Leo's wheels start turning, look out, because Leo is going to spit out a big fucking book. And that's what he does. Tolstoy writes this massive theoretical treatise called The Kingdom of God is Within You. Now, if you're looking for a fun holiday read, by that I mean something to keep you company on the beach or by the pool, I would not recommend The Kingdom of God is Within You. The book is basically Tolstoy's 1,000-page response to the hideous state of affairs in Tsarist Russia, which meant if you were not a nobleman, you were probably a serf, which meant you were basically a slave. And what's worse, if you were an able-bodied serf, you would probably be conscripted into the Tsar's army for a minimum of like 25 years, which was basically a death sentence. So, Leo writes, The Kingdom of God is Within You, which is basically his philosophical and strategic playbook for civil disobedience against the Russian state. Now, sadly for Tolstoy and his literary agents, The Kingdom of God is Within You was not a bestseller, probably because not a lot of folks in Russia at that time knew how to read, or maybe because there was no romance in it, no big battle scenes like in War and Peace, no tragic countess like in Anna Karenina who throws herself in front of oncoming trains. I'm not sure why, but it didn't sell. Anyway, but somehow, some way, a copy of this book gets translated into English, and somehow, some way, it gets into the hands of a young lawyer living in South Africa. Now, this lawyer is a very thoughtful soul. He studied in England, and he's from India, and his name is Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. But for the purposes of this podcast, I'm just going to call him Gandhi, even though his friends called him Bapu. Anyway, Tolstoy's book gets this young Indian lawyer's wheels turning. And what happens is he and Leo Tolstoy become pen pals. That's right, they start writing letters. And you can read those letters to this day. You just got to Google letters to a Hindu. Anyway, Gandhi's over in South Africa, and he's got big problems with dealing with that all-white government who won't let the Indians ride on trains or walk on the sidewalk or vote. These guys insist all the Indian folk carry ID cards and pay extra taxes, and this really, it just bugs Gandhi. It pisses him fucking off. After all, he is a British subject, and he insists on the proper respect accorded to that status, even if his skin is a little dark and he has a weird accent. So, Gandhi gets organized. He moves out of his apartment and starts an ashram of like-minded social thinkers And yep, he names it Tolstoy Farm after his favorite pen pal. That's pretty cool, huh? Yeah. Anyway, Gandhi, who was a prolific writer himself, he writes a book about his struggles in South Africa, and he calls it Satyagraha in South Africa. Now, this is a book I would recommend. Very readable, vivid in its descriptions, really takes you back in time. Now, about this funky Hindu word, Satyagraha. Satyagraha is a term invented by Gandhi, and loosely translated, it means soul force, or even more loosely translated means passive resistance, or to resist passively. Basically, Satyagraha is the spiritual discipline and tactical manifesto that compels the practitioner, i.e. the Satyagrahi, to confront injustice without causing harm to those that are perpetrating that injustice. The practitioner of Satyagraha has an ironclad covenant with himself, his God, and his co-Satyagrahis to never, now, I mean fucking ever, practice violence of any kind in any form against his adversaries. Now, if you do, you get kicked out of the Satyagraha Club for life. So it was a very serious covenant. Now, the dedicated Satyagrahi offers himself and only himself up as a victim in his struggles. And fundamental to this discipline, the Satyagraha discipline, is the idea that the nonviolent pursuit of justice is in and of itself a spiritual act. And if you're looking for another example of a really good Satyagrahi, I think that turn the other cheek dude, Jesus F. Christ, would be a very good example. So, long story really short. All this Satyagraha, nonviolent soul force shit confused the hell out of the South African authorities. I mean, they could deal with the spear-chucking Zulus or the bullet-shooting Boers. But these Indian folk with their fucking halos on their heads and their marches and their sit-ins and burning those friggin' ID cards and their goddamn hunger strikes, crowding our jails. I mean, the South African generals, frankly, they didn't have a clue how to deal with it. In fact, it drove them so batshit crazy that they finally agreed to negotiate. Who'd have thunk it? Anyway, by around 1917, the Indian lawyer dude, Gandhi, sails back to his home in India and throws himself into politics and the independence movement. Gandhi opens his little Satyagraha tool bag, and he and his legion of loyalists start marching to the sea and sitting in and fasting and going to jail again until the Brits, after having their armies decimated in World War II, cried, "Uncle, we can't take this shit anymore. You Indians, go spin your own frigging cotton. Go collect your own goddamn salt. Take your fucking country. We are out of here." And so they went. Anyway, long story short, Gandhi becomes the father of Indian independence, and more importantly, an inspiration to the fucked over and persecuted all over the world. And just when things were calming down in India, the Indian lawyer dude gets assassinated. And then he was cremated, and most of his ashes are committed to the Ganges River. But a small portion of those ashes somehow, some way, make it all the way to Santa Monica. Yeah, and today they rest in an urn over at the lake shrine located at the end of Sunset Boulevard, which actually isn't in Santa Monica but Pacific Palisades. And you can't miss the lake shrine, but it's part of the Self-Realization Church on the left. But if you do, and you hit the Pacific Ocean, well, then you've gone too far. But that's beside the point. The point is, the legacy of Gandhi in South Africa and in India influences a black American preacher dude over in Alabama named Martin Luther King. And now you know the rest of the story. Well, actually, you don't know the rest until you read my screenplay, The Children. That's right, my latest lit effort, adapted from David Halberstam's book of the same title. Because there's another fella that few really know about who, for my money, was just as important as that Alabama preacher dude, Martin Luther King. And this guy's name is James Lawson. Now, James Lawson was a Methodist minister dude. And he spent some time over in India studying Satyagraha. And when he comes back to America in 1959, he ends up training a bunch of kids over in Nashville, and they end up ordering hamburgers at all-white lunch counters and sitting in front of those segregated Greyhound buses. And these Satyagrahas pretty much end segregation in the American South. Pretty cool, huh? Anyway, FYI, this dude, Lawson, is still alive and kicking and giving Satyagraha workshops the last Saturday of every month right here in L.A. at the Holman Methodist Church on West Adams Street. And for my money, he deserves to be right up there on Mount Rushmore with King and Gandhi and Tolstoy and that Indian poet dude who I know nothing about. But either way, the beat goes on, and that about wraps up episode 21 of A Rebel Without Applause. Once again, I wanted to thank you for hanging in for this little meditation on Satyagraha and the Indian lawyer dude. And special thanks in my world to my super soul sister, Casey K., who's working her crystals and her little sage sprinkles to keep my dad healthy and alive, who's at the hospital right now. So I'm sending good wishes in every direction, and my gratitude is unbounded for her and for you. Until next time, adios, goodbye, and adieu.